Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're standing in the rugged heart of the California gold rush, a land of dust, cold rivers, and restless promise, where canvas camps line the hillsides and the air smells faintly of pine smoke and worn-down hope. You're not a legendary prospector or a storybook hero, just an ordinary wanderer moving through a world shaped by shovels, dreams, and the hum of distant picks. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You follow the road because it gives your feet something simple to do. Step after step through the tired dust that rises around your ankles and drifts away in thin, lazy clouds. You keep moving. There isn't much else to rely on now. Only the slow rhythm of progress, the shuffle of worn leather, the weight of the pack pulling quietly at your shoulders. Even the promise that pulled you out here feels faint, like a lantern held too far down a dark path. But you walk toward it anyway. The idea of turning back presses heavier on your chest than the pack on your spine. The land stretches in every direction, soft and muted under a sun that seems reluctant to shine. It hangs there, pale and exhausted, as though it has seen too many hopeful travellers and grown tired of watching them fade. You feel no urge to impress it. You let your thoughts drift, loose and unhurried. The world is wide enough to swallow them without complaint. The day moves with a sluggish patience. You pass through low swells of dry grass that brush against your legs like half-hearted companions. The breeze slips past your ears in a thin whistle, barely mustering the strength to cool your skin. Somewhere far off, a lonely bird calls, its cry stretching into the open like a question, with no one willing to answer. You adjust the strap of your pack and breathe in air that tastes faintly of earth and old heat. The trail bends and straightens and bends again. A quiet suggestion, that direction doesn't matter much out here. You follow it anyway. It's the only thing that still pretends to know where it's going. People talk about the West as if it were a golden sheet pulled taut across the horizon, shimmering at all hours, whispering invitations to the willing. But as you walk, you begin to realize something quieter, something more honest. The land isn't calling you. It's simply there, indifferent, wide, and waiting to see whether you'll fade into it like so many others. Your boots leave soft impressions in the dust. Each print holds the shape of a decision you've already made, one you're still not entirely sure you understand. You think of the stories you heard before setting off, easy fortunes, nuggets as big as fists, rivers that flash gold in the morning sun. The storytellers always emphasized the brilliance of it all, the glitter that danced through their memories. They didn't mention how far the road felt once you were actually on it. They didn't mention how quickly those bright promises dulled when tired feet and empty pockets were the only things keeping time. You shift your weight forward and keep walking. By mid-afternoon, the light turns a little warmer, though never fully bright. It washes the land in a soft haze that makes everything look slightly out of reach. Mountains rise slowly in the distance, their edges blurred by a veil of dust that never seems to settle. You watch them without urgency. They're not going anywhere, and neither are you. Not quickly, at least. The trail begins to descend into a shallow valley where the wind carries the scent of something faintly metallic. It reminds you of tools left in the rain, or creek water after a storm. You imagine the rivers you'll be kneeling beside soon enough, the cold biting your fingers as you swirl a pan in endless circles. People say you get used to the ache after a while. You don't know if that's true, but the thought slips into your mind and settles there like a stone. A wagon rattles past in the opposite direction. The driver gives you the sort of nod that tired men offer each other. No greeting, no curiosity, just an acknowledgement that you both exist on the same long stretch of road. The mule pulling the wagon looks older than the wood it's hauling, but its hooves find their way forward with a stubborn determination. You watch the dust rise behind it until it fades into the slow-burning afternoon. There's a moment where the silence deepens, stretching wide enough for you to fall into. You let yourself sink a little. The West has a quiet that feels almost intentional, as though it's waiting for you to confess something you haven't yet figured out. You breathe out slowly, and the silence holds your breath like a secret. A few miles later, you pause near a cluster of rocks that offer a bit of shade. Sitting feels strange at first, as if your legs have forgotten how to bend after so many hours of trudging forward. You lower yourself carefully, letting your muscles ease into the moment. The ground is warm beneath you. Your pack slumps beside you like a tired companion. You take a sip from your canteen. The water tastes like metal and dust, but it still softens your throat. You close your eyes, letting the distant hum of insects fill your ears. It's a gentle, persistent drone, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but quietly claims it anyway. You think about the place you left behind, not with longing, but with a tired curiosity. The walls, the faces, the routines, they all feel like parts of someone else's life now. A life that didn't glitter or promise anything extravagant. A life that was simply steady, predictable. You didn't appreciate it much then. That's the thing about steadiness. No one notices it until it's gone, replaced by a road that stretches on without end and a dream that shrinks the closer you get to it. You stand again because resting too long feels dangerous. Stillness has a way of tempting you to reconsider your choices. So you pull the pack onto your back, tighten the straps, and return to the trail before doubt has time to gather its footing. The shadows lengthen as evening edges in. The sun finally decides to put on a bit of a show, casting the world in a muted gold that feels almost ironic. You watch the light spread across the valley, soft and tired, like a painter brushing his last strokes before setting down the brush. If this is the gold people came chasing, you think, maybe the whole journey is one long misunderstanding. A small group of travellers appears ahead, 2 men and a woman, their clothes pressed flat against them by the wind. As you pass, they greet you with faint nods, nothing more. Everyone out here seems wrapped in a quiet bubble of their own thoughts, their own private bargains with hope and disappointment. You feel no urge to break the silence. Words seem unnecessary, almost intrusive, against the slow murmur of the land. The sky begins to dim, the blue draining away until only a thin band of pale light clings stubbornly to the horizon. You breathe in the cooling air. It carries the faint smell of dry sage and distant smoke. Maybe from a camp you'll reach by night, or maybe from some other wanderer who has already decided to stop for the day. Your steps grow slower, not from exhaustion, but from a soft recognition that night changes the pace of everything. The road feels gentler now, as if loosened by the coming darkness. The heat releases its hold, and the world exhales. You find yourself moving with a calmer rhythm, your boots tapping lightly against the earth. A coyote calls somewhere far away, a thin, wavering sound that spreads into the open and dissolves. You let it pass through you without fear. Out here, even the wild seems tired. Nothing hunts, nothing chases, everything simply endures. Your thoughts wander to the weeks ahead, though not in a deliberate way. They drift like loose threads caught in a soft breeze. You picture the rivers, the cold mornings, the slow circles of the pan. You picture the camps with their patched tents, their swollen hopes, their quiet nights. None of it frightens you, none of it excites you. It simply waits, like the next breath, the next mile, the next day. You walk until the light thins into twilight, a muted wash of lavender and fading gold. Your body settles into a steady hum, neither pain nor comfort, just the familiar ache of someone who's grown used to carrying the same weight for too long. You feel it in your shoulders, your calves, your spine. It becomes a part of you, as natural as the dust coating your boots. When the first stars appear, you stop again. Not because you must, but because it feels right. You lower your pack once more, letting it rest on the ground as you tilt your face toward the sky. The stars look distant, almost distracted, as though they have their own burdens to carry. You breathe slowly, letting the cool night air settle in your lungs. It tastes clean in a way the day never does. Sharp, quiet, honest. You feel the faintest hint of something like relief, though it's too gentle to fully name. The road lies ahead, a pale streak barely visible in the dimming light. It doesn't promise anything. It never did. But it waits patiently, ready to accept whatever steps you have left to give. You take one more breath, gather your pack, and start walking again. The night folds softly around you, and the road stretches on with a slow, indifferent grace, quietly ushering you toward whatever waits beyond the next hill. By the time the camps come into view, the morning light has taken on the dull softness of a sky that never quite decides what it wants to be. You follow the bend of the road until the land spills open and reveals a scattered clutter of canvas tents and crooked wooden shacks. They sit along the riverbank like a row of weary thoughts lined up in the mind of someone who hasn't slept properly in years. From a distance, the place looks almost hopeful. Little flecks of white fabric glowing faintly in the drifting haze. Thin lines of smoke curling gently upwards as though someone were coaxing dreams into the air. But as you draw closer, the illusion thins, and the truth shows itself in the uneven angles of tent poles, the mud-packed paths, the sagging ropes, the lean-tos built out of scraps that were never meant to shelter anyone. Your boots sink slightly into the soft earth, and the mud clings with an eagerness that feels a little too familiar. The smell hits you next. Damp ground, cooled ash, something metallic lingering beneath it all. The scent of river water mixed with want. It's a tired smell, seasoned by the breath of men who've whispered their fortunes into the dirt and waited for the ground to answer. Voices drift toward you, low and mumbled, though none of them carry any real conviction. You catch fragments, claims of big strikes, rumours of a nugget pulled from a creek somewhere up the ridge, stories shaped by exaggeration and necessity. Hope is a currency here, traded as often as supplies, sometimes worth less. A man with a beard gone wild around the edges wanders past you, his boots caked in dried mud that cracks with every step. He doesn't look at you, not really. His eyes flicker briefly in your direction, but they keep moving. Like he's afraid stopping too long might reveal something he isn't ready to see. You keep walking, letting the camp settle around you in slow folds. The fires are small and tired, more smoke than flame. Their dark wisps snake through the air, as if trying to escape the weight of the place. Around one fire, a group of men sits close together, shoulders hunched inward. A pot hangs over the coals, bubbling with something that might once have been hearty, but now seems mostly like water, convincing itself it's soup. They watch it with an odd mix of hunger and resignation, as if waiting for flavour requires more effort than they have to give. You hear someone laugh, a short, brittle sound that breaks too quickly. It's followed by another voice insisting, almost desperately, that gold always lies just a little deeper, a little farther upriver, a little closer tomorrow. The others nod because nodding is easier than arguing with a dream that's already wearing thin. You pass a tent patched with mismatched pieces of cloth, blue stripes stitched to brown canvas, a corner reinforced with burlap. Someone inside coughs, a slow, dragging sound, followed by a muttered curse. The cough repeats, softer this time, like it's apologising for being heard at all. Children dart between tents, their footsteps quick and light, as though the mud itself excuses their playfulness. One of them carries a tin cup, shaking it as if hoping something might rattle inside. The empty clatter rings out before fading into the breeze. Their faces are smudged with dirt, their clothes hanging loose in places where cloth has worn thin. Still, they run, because running is what children do when the adults around them have forgotten how. A small creek winds through the edge of the camp, its water moving with a slow, indifferent calm. Several men kneel beside it, pans dipped into the current. You watch their motions. Scoop, swirl, drain, hope. Scoop, swirl, drain, hope. Over and over, a cycle practiced with such weary precision that it feels like watching the hands of a tired clock, marking time no one asked it to keep. You walk to the water's edge, crouching slightly, to run your fingers along the surface. It's colder than you expect, a sharp reminder that the world here doesn't warm itself for anyone. You imagine the ache that must creep into the knuckles of those who stay here for hours, swirling away at the river's stubborn mercy, and yet they kneel, patient as monks, chasing sermons whispered by a stream that never promises salvation. Behind you, someone is arguing over a claim line, though arguing is perhaps too strong a word. Their voices are raised only a little, scraping gently against the morning air, as if even their anger has been diluted by exhaustion. One man holds a wooden stake in his hand, its tip cracked, its surface rough. The other gestures toward the river, insisting the boundary lies closer to the bend. It's the kind of dispute that could erupt into something violent elsewhere, but here it falters beneath the shared understanding that fighting takes energy no one wants to lose. You find yourself wandering between tents, your steps slow, almost measured. Each shelter carries its own story, stitched into the seams and sagging corners. Some tents flap loosely in the breeze, their ropes slack, their canvas worn thin by too many nights of wind. Others stand rigid and newly pitched, their owners still clinging to the crispness of belief. A woman sits on a crate outside one tent, sewing a tear in a shirt with careful, deliberate stitches. Her face is set in a quiet concentration, her fingers moving steadily, as if the simple act of mending fabric might be enough to hold her world together. She doesn't look up when you pass, but there's something about the way her shoulders rise and fall that feels strangely familiar. An unspoken agreement between strangers who understand the weight of days measured by slow progress. Further along, a man sells coffee from a dented pot, pouring it into small tin cups for anyone who can spare a coin. The coffee smells burnt, thick, bitter in a way that twists through the air and settles in your stomach. A few men gather around him, cradling their cups as though the warmth alone might buy them another hour of determination. Their faces are swollen from sleep or the lack of it, their eyes carrying that faraway glaze worn by people who have been waiting too long for good news. A mule brays somewhere near the edge of camp, the sound splitting the air with a weary sharpness. It stands tethered to a post, its coat dull, its ribs faint beneath the skin. The animal watches the camp with the same tired curiosity you feel growing inside yourself, as if wondering what all these humans are doing, chasing something that keeps slipping through their fingers. The mud deepens as you walk toward the riverbank, swallowing the edges of your boots with each step. You can feel the ground trying to hold you there, as if the earth itself knows the pattern of this place. People arrive with bright eyes, sink into the mud of their own expectations, and slowly disappear into the rhythm of waiting. You watch a man lift his pan from the water, tilting it gently as the silt and sand slide away. For a moment, just a small one, something glints at the bottom. His breath catches. You can almost feel the rise of hope in him, fragile and trembling. But then he looks closer. Whatever shimmer he saw was nothing more than a fleck of mica, a sunlit trick of the river. The light fades from his eyes in a quiet, practiced way, and he returns to the slow swirl of water and sediment. As the morning wears on, conversations sharpen into murmurs, the camp finding its strange low hum of existence. Tools clang faintly, pans clatter, someone hammers a board into place with a rhythm that loses conviction halfway through. The camp isn't loud, it simply breathes, as though all its inhabitants share the same slow inhale and exhale. You wander until you reach the edge of the settlement, where a cluster of abandoned tents slumps like folded memories. Their stakes are bent, their fabrics slack with neglect. Perhaps their owners moved on to try their luck somewhere else, or perhaps the land simply took back what the people no longer had the will to maintain. Either way, the empty spaces speak too, quietly but unmistakably. Standing there, you feel a strange mix of weariness and recognition. The dream that pulled you west is here, yes, but in a form softer and more fragile than you expected. It's not the gleaming possibility whispered in taverns or passed along by travellers. It's something smaller, something slumped beside muddy boots and faded canvas. Something that depends less on luck and more on a stubbornness you're not yet sure you possess. You take a slow breath, letting the thick scent of smoke and churned earth settle in your lungs. The air tastes of damp mornings and worn-out hopes, but it carries a strange steadiness too, a sense that whatever lies ahead won't rush toward you, nor away from you. It will wait. It has been waiting a long time. Your steps carry you deeper into the camp, drawn by the quiet pull of lives lived beside rivers that refuse to glitter on command. The day stretches on with a gentle heaviness, and you move through it as though wading through a memory you haven't made yet. Nothing here promises gold, but everything here promises to keep you long enough to learn why so many stay anyway. You spend the first hour searching for a spot that looks like it might forgive your presence. The camp is crowded with the soft clutter of other people's attempts at living. Tilted tents, shallow fire pits, crates that once held something promising and now serve as makeshift tables. You walk past all of them, letting your feet choose a direction until they stop on a patch of earth that feels no better or worse than any other. The mud here is thick, dark, and vaguely resigned. It seems to understand what you're about to ask of it. You lower your pack, feeling the pull of gravity loosen from your shoulders in a slow sigh. The ground accepts the weight with a soft squelch. This, you think, is your corner now. Not much, but then again, nothing in this place pretends to be more than it is. The tent goes up with a stubborn reluctance. The poles are crooked in the way tired things often are, bending just enough to challenge your patience, but not quite enough to break. You steady them, adjust the ropes, retie knots with hands still humming from the long walk. Each tug draws a faint tremor from the canvas, as though it's bracing itself for the nights ahead. By the time the structure stands, it leans slightly to the left, like someone trying to appear confident while fighting off sleep. You almost admire its honesty. Inside, the light filters through the fabric in a dim, muted wash. You lay out your cot, if cot is the right word for wooden slats that creak at the slightest touch. When you press your palm against it, the boards respond with a low, unhappy groan. Somewhere far off, a dog barks half-heartedly, as if it too resents the idea of any unnecessary exertion. You sit on the cot, letting its complaint settle beneath you. The air inside the tent carries the scent of canvas, warmed by sunlight, mixed with the faint musk of dried earth. You run your fingers along the edge of your pack, tracing each tear and stitch, like pages in a worn journal. Everything you own is here. A pan, a shovel, a few pieces of clothing, tools that promise more potential than results. The weight of these objects is familiar. The weight of what they represent, less so. Stepping back outside, you take in the view from your new shelter. The river glints behind the trees, though the light on its surface feels more like a trick of reflection than actual brightness. The water curls around stones in slow, deliberate movements, murmuring as if telling old stories to anyone patient enough to listen. It's a quiet voice, the river, a voice that seems to know the difference between those who come seeking fortune and those who come seeking reasons to keep going. The mud grips your boots in a gentle, persistent embrace with every step. It pulls just enough to remind you that leaving isn't as simple as choosing a direction. You breathe in the thick air, letting it settle in your lungs. It's strange how a place can feel both new and unsurprised by you, as if most of the people who've stood here before carried the same mixture of determination and doubt. Across the camp, someone is hammering a board onto the front of a small shack. The sound is steady and rhythmic, though each strike seems to lose conviction before it lands. The man pauses occasionally, staring into the middle distance before lifting the hammer again. You watch him for a moment, recognizing the quiet negotiation he's making with himself. One more nail, one more chance to believe the effort matters. Closer to the river, a few men work their pans, their backs curved in a way that suggests they've been bent by more than just physical labor. The river's steady motion whispers around them, slipping through their fingers again and again. It has no interest in their intentions. It simply continues, patient as time itself. You walk toward it, letting the sound pull you in. When you kneel by the water's edge, the cold reaches through the surface and presses gently against your skin, a small reminder of how quickly comfort evaporates out here. You fill your pan, watching the water swirl around the silt. The river gives nothing freely, but you move the pan anyway, learning the slow rotation others perform with absent-minded precision. It takes only a few minutes before a dull ache forms in your wrist, a quieter one in your lower back. You pause, letting the pain settle. People speak of the work as if it's a pathway to glory. In practice, it is simply repetitive motion performed under the vague promise of luck. The sand slips away in thin layers, each revealing nothing but smaller grains beneath. The futility settles around you as naturally as the rivers chill. When you finally stand, your knees crack faintly. You shake the water from your hands and step back onto the mud, the ground giving slightly beneath your weight. The camp's noises drift around you. Voices low, clinking metal. The occasional cough that sounds like it's trying to escape someone's chest. A man approaches with a bundle of firewood under one arm. His clothes are streaked with dried clay. His hat pulled low over eyes that carry the distant glaze of someone who's long since stopped asking for miracles. He offers a nod, the kind shared between two people, acknowledging the same unspoken truth. You return it, and he continues on without a word. You gather your own firewood, thin branches mostly, the kind that burn quickly and leave little warmth behind. Back at your tent, you build a small fire pit, arranging stones in a loose circle. The flames catch with surprising eagerness, flaring briefly before settling into a soft, amber glow. You sit beside it, letting the heat brush against your hands. The warmth doesn't linger long, but for now, it's enough. The sounds of the camp shift as evening stretches across the land. Conversations lower into murmurs. A harmonica plays somewhere nearby, the notes wandering, unsure of where they're meant to go. The river continues its quiet song, indifferent to the day's exhaustion. You eat a simple meal, beans warmed in a small tin, a piece of bread hardened at the edges. Each bite tastes of effort more than flavour, but it fills the hollow inside you just enough. As you chew, the fire pops, sending small sparks into the air. They rise briefly before fading, tiny imitations of hope disappearing into the dark. Your body drifts toward fatigue with the steady inevitability of a tide. You step inside your tent, listening to the canvas rustle as a faint breeze moves across its surface. The cot creaks again when you lie down, the sound strangely comforting in its familiarity. You pull your blanket over you, though it does little to stop the night chill from settling into your bones. Cold here feels personal, an intimacy you never asked for but must learn to tolerate. Outside, the camp's breathing slows, footsteps soften, voices dim. A lantern flickers somewhere, its glow faint through the tent walls. You stare at the shadows shifting across the fabric, the faint shapes bending with each movement of the wind. The river continues whispering, its voice a constant presence, as if commenting quietly on the choices you've made. You close your eyes, but sleep hesitates, circling like an animal wary of getting too close. Your thoughts drift, not toward home, but toward the stretch of road behind you and the uncertain days ahead. You picture the pan in your hand, the way the water swirled without promise. You picture the tent sagging under the weight of their own persistence. None of it frightens you. None of it comforts you either. It simply exists, like the mud beneath your shelter, ready to pull you in deeper the longer you stay. Eventually, your breath grows slower. The cot's quiet protest becomes background noise, and the fire outside burns down to a soft glow. In the dim stillness of the tent, you begin to understand that settling here isn't a single act. It's a gradual surrender to the rhythm of a place that asks for everything but offers very little in return. The river murmurs one last time before your mind drifts, as if responding to a question you didn't realize you'd asked. You let the sound guide you into the uneasy calm of the night, knowing that tomorrow the mud will cling to you with just a little more familiarity and a little less resistance. You rise before the sun, not because some inner clock insists, but because the cold makes staying under the blanket harder than the work itself. Outside, the world is a whisper, canvas walls sighing, the river's breath moving steady and low, but already men are moving with the slow, practiced motions of people who have learned to make labor into ritual. You join them without fanfare, stepping into a morning that smells of damp wool and wet earth. Your breath clouds in front of you for a moment, then drifts away, and you find yourself at the water's edge with your pan cupped in both hands. The river meets you without ceremony. It slides over stones, curls around roots, and goes on as if you were not there at all. You hold the pan flat, let the cold bite into your fingers, and scoop. The first catch feels always the same, an unremarkable handful of sand, gravel, a few bits of dark silt that glint when they catch the light. You tip the pan and let the water do its patient work, watching the heavier pieces settle while the lighter stuff spills over. It's a slow, almost meditative action. Tilt, swirl, rest, drain. You find that your breathing matches the motion. Inhale with the lift. Exhale as you let the water run. Hours pass with the soft sameness of a clock, whose hands move in invisible circles. Your wrist learns the arc, the angle that teases the most from the pan, without wasting energy. Sometimes your palm catches a tiny gleam, an honest speck that makes your pulse quicken for a second. Then you tilt the pan, and it seems smaller than you dared hope. That instant of brightness becomes something you handle carefully, like a joke told to yourself to keep from going under. You smile without meaning to, a tiny private acknowledgement that the river's teasing is part of the day. Nearby, men work with different tools and temperaments. Some prefer the slow dignity of panning, others use cruder devices, rockers that shudder and clank, sluice boxes that channel water in an attempt to shoulder the work for them. There's an elegant futility in all these methods. They are small machines of hope, each calibrated against the same indifferent current. You watch an old rocker, a timber contraption, whose owner pats it with the affection of someone who speaks kindly to things he cannot otherwise console. The rocker rocks, the water rushes through it, and the world keeps going. The river teaches in its own quiet way. It rewards repetition and punishes greed. It ignores argument and refuses bribes. You learn quickly that hurry is a poor companion here. Frantic motions only stir up more silt and make the bright pieces harder to see. The river prefers a steady, respectful patience. It will, on occasion, grant a mercy, a small nugget that feels absurdly heavy for its size, a fleck you can pocket and carry like a talisman. Those moments are rare enough to be nearly hallucinatory. They come mostly to remind you that the world can be capricious, not to provide a steady livelihood. Days fold into each other with little fanfare. You find yourself marking time by small things, the way the light falls on the water at noon, the sound of the blacksmith hammering in the camp, the sturdiness of your boots as mud clings to them. Conversation around the river is practical and low. Men exchange tips more than stories because survival here favours the pragmatic. Someone will show you a new way to angle the pan, a slight shift in timing that loosens stubborn sand. You try it, and for a little while, your wrist moves with less complaint. These tiny improvements feel like secret victories. There is a kind of humour here, dry and unadorned. Men joke about the strange economy of prospecting, how some trade the fanciest stories for the smallest coins, how talk of a rich seam 2 miles up the bend seems to travel faster than anyone can walk. You laugh sometimes at a ridiculous claim, louder than you mean to, because humour becomes a tool as necessary as any shovel. It keeps the mood from hardening into something dangerous. You hear a neighbour tell with a straight face that he dreamed of a mountain made entirely of gold. The small audience grins and goes back to work. These moments are brief and human, like sparks thrown off when stones meet. Fatigue settles into your bones, the way the river settles sediment, gradually, invisibly, then all at once. When your hands ache and your back complains, you lean on small routines that feel like anchors. Packing your pan the same way each night, tightening the knots on the tent ropes until they lie exactly as you left them. Boiling the same thin coffee that tastes like charcoal and resolve. There's a dignity to the repetition, even if it admits only a modest sort of pride. You tell yourself you will endure because that is the measure you have chosen. Sometimes the river gives you an unremarkable bounty, a few shreds of fool's gold that look promising until you rub them and see the brittle lie. You pocket them anyway sometimes, because there is a kind of consolation in the weight of something, even if that weight is merely illusion. Other times, the river offers nothing at all, and you stand with empty hands and a full awareness of the quiet absurdity of your persistence. On such days, the camp seems to close in, the tents like a chorus of patient eyes, watching whether you will keep going. You do, of course. You always do. The weather shapes its own small tragedies and consolations. Rain turns the soil to a slippery pudding that makes each step a careful calculation. You watch men work in a steady drizzle, their clothes soaked and heavy, but they keep moving because waiting means losing claims to the careless. Heat, too, feels like a test. Days when the sun refuses to soften, when the dust rises in thin spirals and finds its way into every seam. You learn to read these moods. A cloud bank that changes direction may save your back for a few hours. A wind that shifts can blow the best prospects away. The river, indifferent, carries on regardless, its surface reflecting whatever sky it has been given. Evenings carry their own rituals. You wash the day's grit from your hands in the last warm water you can spare, then sit by a small fire while the camp folds into dusk. Stories surface with the smoke, short recollections of houses left behind, of small comforts that now feel like distant luxuries. People trade more than news. They trade reassurance that they are still capable of laughter. You listen and add nothing, letting the company be enough. The night brings a slow hush, and the river's voice becomes a softer, more intimate thing, like a confidant, gently reminding you that all things pass. Sometimes when the moon is clear and the river's surface becomes a long silver thought, you feel something like clarity. It is not the sharp clarity of a successful strike, but the quieter, stranger comprehension that this life is teaching you something deeper than how to separate gold from silt. You begin to understand your own limits and your own small capacities, how much cold you can bear, how many disappointments you can carry, what it feels like to make peace with measures of success that the world might call modest. There is an odd honour in this slow education. You notice small patterns among the men. Some arrive with brash plans and an abundance of confidence that fades in neat stages. Some stay because they have nowhere else to go that seems less uncertain. A few quieter ones seem to find an odd contentment in the cadence of daily toil. They are not the loudest, but they are the steadiest, and their presence becomes a kind of quiet counsel to those around them. You begin to measure your own days, not by the weight of what you find, but by whether you can still stand to try again in the morning. On rare occasions, the river rewards more generously than habit suggests, a glint that becomes a flake that becomes a nugget. When these moments arrive, the reaction is small but sincere. A dry exhale, a hand pressed to the chest, a careful display so as not to invite envy. The gold you find is rarely enough to change your world, but it does change the day. It buys a better piece of meat at the market, perhaps, or a new patch of canvas for the tent. For a little while, the burden feels lighter, as if the river had nodded in your direction and acknowledged your effort. These acknowledgements are rare and therefore doubly precious. Night deepens and the camp settles into a breathing hush. You clean the pan, set your tools in their familiar places, and let your limbs stretch with that delicious feeling of having used them fully. The river keeps talking, patient and unhurried, and you listen. Somewhere between the rhythm of the pan and the cadence of the current, a kind of tired peace sets in. It isn't the peace of triumph. It is the quieter peace of someone who has learned to accept a life measured in small, persistent efforts and occasional mercies. You fold your blanket and lie down with the echo of the river's lesson in your bones. Patience is a teacher that offers no certainties, only the steady, dependable passage of time. You hold that lesson close and feel, for the first time in a while, that it might be enough. You begin to measure time in the small, precise absence left behind by the pan. Each morning you rise with the same set of motions: the zipper of the tent, the scrape of a boot on packed mud, the brief, mechanical nod to neighbours already bent at the river. And each morning the pan answers you with the same thin, polite silence. You scoop and tilt, scrape and let the current do its sifting, and then lift the pan to peer for that tiny, impatient shimmer that promises meaning. Most times there is nothing, only the grey, dull bed of the river, settled and indifferent. Those nothing hours accumulate like stones along the bank, a pile you can both see and pretend not to notice. Counting the empties becomes a ritual you never intended to start. You catch yourself counting under your breath as you work. 1, 2, 3. Small numbers that gather into weeks without ceremony. The count is not a game so much as a ledger kept in the back of your mind. It tallies the patience you've spent and the patience you have left. With each empty pan, the ledger grows heavier. Hope shrinks in the corners, losing inches until it's a fragile thing you handle with the same care you'd give to a cracked cup. There is a peculiar shame to coming away with nothing. Not the shame of failure, as people usually mean it, but a quieter, more domestic embarrassment. The feeling that you have been found out for having believed too easily. You tuck that shame away as tactfully as you can. You keep your face neutral when someone asks if the day was good. You say, same as usual, because elaboration would be like offering your handful of emptiness for inspection. The camp accepts these small evasions. Everyone here shelters similar truths behind heads bowed over pans. The routine presses on regardless of your mood. When it rains, the mud becomes a sticky clock that slows everything down. Water fills the holes you dig and blurs the lines of your claim until the river looks like one wide, indifferent sheet. You keep working even then, because stopping feels like admitting that perhaps the river has already decided its lessons are complete. On sunlit mornings, dust dries into a fine coat on your palms, and the pan seems heavier by contrast. Even the light conspires to make the smallest interior things feel more burdensome. Empty pans teach patience, yes, but they teach other lessons too. Lessons in economy and in the strange skill of making small pleasures last. You start to notice the value of a single coin more than you ever thought you would. A coin buys salt or a small piece of sugar, and those little things bloom into evenings that taste slightly less of ash. Sometimes a coin lets you trade for a fresh egg at the edge of camp. You crack it slowly, savouring the way the yolk looks like a promise, even when you know better. These savoured moments are anchors. They do not change the ledger, but they alter how you read its numbers. There is a rhythm to the talking in camp that matches the rhythm of empty pans. Men gather in low clusters to exchange tips, half advice, or the kind of stories that smooth the edges of disappointment. They speak in jokes sometimes, softer ones that carry the truth in their undercurrent, ridicule offered as a kind of protection. There's a pocket down by Miller's Bend, someone will say, and you'll listen because listening costs nothing. The stories keep moving like driftwood on the river, and from time to time one will snag on a new ear and become the flimsiest of comforts. The more days that pass with little to show, the more subtle your defences become. You cultivate an economy of gestures, a nod instead of a story, a brief smile instead of a complaint. You learn to fold your longing inwards so it takes up less space. It is an artful shrinking, practiced in private, so that others in camp do not see how the bright spark inside you has been reduced to a flicker. Yet the flicker remains, stubborn as a moth hovering near a lantern. It keeps you from becoming entirely resigned. Sometimes you look at your tools and imagine them as relics of a life that once had clearer edges. The shovel, its handle smoothed by other hands. The pan, rim nicked and dulled by 100 indifferent encounters with silt. The shirt patched at the elbow. Each holds stories you don't always want to tell. At night, you lay these items out by the tent and watch their small silhouettes in the lantern light. They seem to wait patiently, not for gold, but for you to decide whether to keep trying. The camp itself becomes a teacher of compromises. You notice bargains struck day after day, a loaf traded for an hour of someone else's labour, a favour proffered for the promise of company at a lonely meal. You see men barter pieces of pride for necessities, and you learn the economy of dignity that runs beneath the more obvious transactions. No one leaves this place untouched by the small compromises. They are the currency of survival here. You may not like the terms, but you learn to accept them, because the alternative is to crumble under the weight of principle. And then there are the rare small mercies, the glint that appears only when you no longer expect it. A single flake in the bottom of a pan can feel like contraband, illegal in its ability to make you grin in public. These finds are awkwardly reverent. You lift them carefully as if they were fragile eggs, and you pass them around like tokens. For a brief while, conversation rises, plans are sketched without embarrassment, and the camp brims with a tentative brightness. The day ends with someone bragging gently about what they will do with the coin from selling a scrap of gold. The bragging is sincere and quick to dissolve. By morning, the ledger is heavier again, and the day resumes its long accounting. You become attuned to the subtleties of disappointment. It is not always loud. Sometimes it sits small and domestic. An ache behind your ribs when you realise you'll need to mend another shirt. A quiet resentment when the last piece of meat at the communal pot is claimed. These minor sorrows add up. They are the ones that teach you to be careful with joy, to ration it like a spool of thread meant to last a whole winter. There are rituals that anchor you to something steadier. You keep your kit organised. Polish the rim of your pan until it catches the light in the right way. Write a few small notes on a scrap of cloth. Dates, odd observations, the name of a person who made you laugh that day. These small acts are a kind of map you trust when the landscape of hope blurs. They remind you that you are still capable of attention, still capable of discerning detail in a world that often seems content to be indifferent. As evenings come, the camp hums with a soft acceptance. People move slowly, voices muffled by fatigue. The river hushes into a steady murmur, and you count the empty pans in your head again. Not with despair now, but with a hard-earned pragmatism. The count no longer defines you, it informs you. You fold that knowledge into the pattern of your life here, and oddly, there is a kind of relief in naming the truth. Before sleep takes you, you stand by the tent flaps and watch embers drift up from the communal fires. The stars are thin and honest tonight, like tin plates nailed to a dark wall. You think of home in a peculiar way, not as a place to return to necessarily, but as a shape of security your hands remember. You think of the road that led you here and of the road you may walk tomorrow. There is fatigue, yes, but there is also a small reserve of endurance you hadn't realized you possessed. When you finally lie down, the world narrows to the sound of your breath and the distant, tireless voice of the river. You cradle the knowledge of another empty pan, the way you cradle a small, stubborn ember, close enough to feel its heat, careful not to let it flare out. Tomorrow, you will go back to the water's edge, and you will tilt your pan into the flow again, counting quietly as you work. The ledger will gain another entry. You will carry it without spectacle, because that too is part of the quiet craft you have learned. To live by incremental choices and to find, in the weight of small perseverance, a peculiar dignity. The morning light creeps over the ridge with the timid softness of something reluctant to touch the earth. You step into it anyway, boots sinking into the damp soil that still remembers the night. Your hands curl around familiar tools, their worn edges smoothing against your fingers like old habits reasserting themselves. The river waits with its usual indifference, whispering its ceaseless commentary as if amused by your persistence. You lower the pan into the cold current and feel the shock of water against your skin. The sensations are familiar, frigid, numbing, oddly bracing, but today there's a faint clarity in your movements, as though your body has grown wise to the river's tempo. Scoop, swirl, pour, breathe. The motions unfold without conscious thought, like muscle memory, carved by repetition and resignation. The sand slides away in slow spirals. You tilt the pan again, expecting nothing more than the dull gleam of mica or the grey mutter of stones. And then, unexpectedly, something else begins to settle. It sits stubbornly at the bottom, refusing to drift with the rest. It's small, so small that you almost dismiss it, but the light catches the speck in a way the others never do. A muted glimmer, brief as a sigh. Your breath stumbles for a beat. You tilt the pan again, carefully this time, unwilling to let the current steal the moment from you. The speck remains. It is unmistakable, heavy for its size, bright in a way that feels both underwhelming and strangely intimate. A flake of gold, real, not imagined, not misinterpreted pyrite, not a cruel shimmer of wet stone. Actual gold. You let the recognition settle in your chest. A warmth rises there, faint but steady, and you feel a smile tug at the corner of your mouth before you can stop it. The feeling is oddly embarrassing, as though you've fallen for a simple trick. You glance around instinctively to see if anyone has noticed the flicker of triumph crossing your face. But the men nearby are lost in their own suspicions of the river, bent over their pans like tired penitents. No eyes turn toward you. It's a private victory, almost shamefully small. You reach into the pan, fingertips brushing the tiny flake. It glints once, politely, as if acknowledging you, before settling into your palm with a weight far greater than its size. A ridiculous thing, a piece of metal barely larger than a grain of sand, and yet your heart tightens around it like a hand closing on a fragile truth. For a moment, you let yourself imagine what this could mean. More flakes, a pocket somewhere in the bend, enough to buy new boots or a better pan, or a night at the tavern, not paid with apologies. You imagine letters home written with steadier hands, food cooked with more generosity than necessity, a life with fewer compromises, even if only slightly. The river murmurs unimpressed. You place the gold into the small pouch you keep near your belt, a pouch that has carried nothing of real value until now. The leather feels oddly foreign in your fingers, as though its purpose has finally been fulfilled after so long being symbolic. You cinch it closed, pat it once, and return to the water with a strange mixture of optimism and caution. But the river, ever consistent, returns to its usual lessons. Pan after pan yields nothing. The speck you found becomes lonelier by the hour, sitting in its pouch like a lone witness to your moment of foolish celebration. You keep working, because stopping now feels like squandering the small flicker of belief the morning gave you. Yet with each empty swirl, the truth grows quieter, more grounded. One flake is just one flake, a gesture, not a promise. Still you continue. The body works through habit, the mind drifts elsewhere. You think about the peculiar nature of hope out here, how it rarely arrives in grand gestures, how it tends to slip in sideways, disguised as something trivial. A gold flake so small you could lose it in a loose seam, a rumour that leads nowhere, a stranger's smile that disappears before you can name its meaning. It's strange, you think, how the smallest things can make you feel both grateful and foolish at once. As the day stretches, the riverbank fills with its usual choreography. Men shift positions, stretch their backs, groan in unison. A few laugh too loudly at jokes that wouldn't survive anywhere else. You hear the slap of a boot against a stone, the clatter of a sluice box being adjusted, the curse of someone whose rocker has jammed again. The sounds create a strange harmony, an orchestra of modest desperation. Someone near you lifts a pan that glints brightly enough to make his voice crack with excitement. The men around him lean in. For a moment the mood swells with shared anticipation. Then he realizes the glimmer is only pyrite. His shoulders sag, and the others drift away with the quiet politeness of people accustomed to disappointment. The man stares into his pan for a long time before tossing the fool's gold aside, watching it vanish into the mud like a misplaced dream. Your hand drifts toward your own pouch almost involuntarily. You touch it gently, feeling the tiny weight within, as though confirming you didn't imagine the morning's discovery. The truth sits there with a kind of humility. It doesn't boast, it doesn't promise anything extravagant. It just exists, waiting for you to decide how to interpret it. The afternoon sun climbs, then fades behind thin clouds. Shadows stretch across the camp, long and tired. You sit on a worn boulder near the water, letting your hands rest. The river continues its endless ritual, shifting around stones with the same slow confidence it's had for centuries. You study it with a softness that surprises you. There is no animosity left, only a quiet understanding. The river owes you nothing, yet it has given you something, however small. Across the way, a young prospector kneels in the mud, a boy no older than 16 by the look of him. His pan slips in his trembling hands. He seems new to the work, hopeful in a fragile, unweathered way. You watch him struggle and feel a strange tenderness. You remember arriving with the same untrained enthusiasm, unaware of the shape disappointment could take. You want to tell him something wise, something that might prepare him for the rhythm of this place. But the words dissolve before they reach your mouth. The river will teach him better than you ever could. You return to your tent as the sky deepens into twilight. The fabric walls glow faintly in the last stretch of daylight. Inside, everything smells faintly of damp wool and wood smoke. You place the pouch on your cot, its small weight almost laughable. Sitting beside it, you open it cautiously and tip the flake into your palm again. In the dim light, it seems even smaller than it had by the river. You roll it gently between your fingers, studying it the way you might study a curious insect. Something living in its own peculiar purpose, unaware of the meaning you're assigning it. It is not wealth, it is not fortune, it is not a turning point or a guarantee. But it is proof. Proof that the river is capable of more than indifference, that the world is capable of moments, brief, quiet moments, that soften the edges of futility. You return the flake to the pouch, tie it closed, and slide it under your pillow, a place of honour that feels almost childish. But you leave it there anyway. Some things you protect not because they're valuable, but because they remind you you're still willing to believe in something, however small. Outside, the camp settles into its nightly hush. The fires crackle. Laughter thins into murmurs. The river continues its soft chant, steady as breath. You lie back on your cot, feeling the faint pressure of the gold beneath your head, like a secret you've promised to keep. Sleep doesn't come quickly, but when it does, it settles with a gentle weight, lighter than hope, heavier than nothing. A small fortune, perhaps, paired with a smaller truth. The truth that sometimes you don't need much to keep going, just enough to feel foolish, and enough to rise again in the morning. Sleep slips away before dawn has a chance to pin it down. You rise into the cold hush that lingers between night and morning, your breath pooling faintly in the tent, before dissolving through the seams. Outside, the camp is already stirring, the muted sounds of metal on metal, boots on damp soil, firewood snapping in reluctant flames. The small gold flake tucked safely among your belongings still weighs no more than a whisper, yet somehow it has made you step into the day with a steadier posture, as though your ribs have been reminded of their purpose. The river glints weakly in the early light, moving with its slow, ancient rhythm. You intend to return to your work, but the edge of the bank is crowded today. A line of men bends toward the water, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the pans, trembling in their hands. There's no room for you yet, not among bodies pressed close by hunger and habit, so you turn instead toward the centre of camp, where fires are being coaxed awake, and a new wave of wanderers has already begun to ripple in. They arrive like weather, unpredictable, shifting, rarely staying long enough for you to determine their direction. Each carries a pack, a coat, a face lined by roads you've never walked. You nod politely, a quiet greeting exchanged among those who understand that presence alone is a form of confession. A gambler sits by one of the early fires, cards shuffling between his fingers in a soft, steady flutter. He has the expression of someone whose fortunes have been mostly imagined rather than lived. As you pass, he glances up, eyes bright in a way that feels practiced. "Care for a hand?" he asks, though his tone suggests he already knows your answer. You shake your head gently. He grins. "Can't blame you. The river's odds aren't much better, though at least it doesn't cheat." The comment hangs in the air like the tail of a smoke trail. You let it drift, offering him a faint smile before moving on. Gamblers have a way of turning their own bitterness into a kind of charm, as if naming misfortune can somehow tame it. You envy that a little. Near a patch of flattened grass sits a preacher, his coat buttoned high around his throat, as though he's trying to keep warmth from escaping, rather than cold from entering. He speaks softly to a cluster of listeners, miners, wanderers, a woman with her child pressed against her side. His voice has a slow cadence, a drawl softened by years of disappointment. You pause long enough to catch a fragment of his sermon. "Truth is a stubborn guest," he murmurs. "It stays only with those who don't chase it too hard." The listeners nod, not because they're convinced, but because nodding takes less effort than arguing with a man whose faith has been reshaped by dust and hunger. You move on, the preacher's words lingering briefly before dissolving into the morning air. A stranger approaches as you walk. His coat is torn at the elbow, his boots wrapped in bits of cloth tied with twine. He carries a burlap sack over his shoulder, its contents clinking faintly with each step. When he reaches you, he shifts the sack to his other side and clears his throat. "You looking for company at your fire?" he asks. You gesture toward the fire pit near your tent, still unlit but waiting, and he nods. Together you walk the short distance. He sets his sack down gently, as though it contains something fragile. When he opens it, you see tin cups, a small kettle, a handful of dried herbs. He moves with the ease of someone who has repeated this ritual at countless camps, offering warmth instead of conversation. As he boils a little water, the scent of sage drifts upward. He doesn't speak much, and you don't press him to. The silence between you is the comfortable kind, shaped by the mutual understanding that words are often used too freely out here. When he finally does speak, it's in a voice worn thin by long travel. "Found a place upriver," he says, "but the earth there gives less than the riverbed. Thought I'd try my luck farther ahead." You nod. His gaze shifts toward the tents, scattered nearby, then returns to the kettle. "You been here long?" "Long enough," you answer. He smiles as though that tells him everything, and perhaps it does. When the water is ready, he pours 2 cups. The sage tea is thin but warm, the flavour earthy enough to remind you of distant foothills. You sip slowly, letting the heat seep into your hands, your throat, your chest. He folds the burlap sack closed once more and ties it neatly. "Thank you," you say. He shakes his head. "No thanks needed. That's just what you do when you're passing through a place that feels tired." He leaves without saying where he's headed. Most wanderers do. Their paths stretch ahead like threads that fray at the edges, slipping through the camp and into the next valley before anyone can tie a knot to hold them. Later in the day you return to the river, finding space among the workers. As you kneel beside the water, you overhear 2 men discussing a strike rumoured miles north. One claims his cousin saw a nugget the size of a thumb. The other swears the story is just bait used by traders selling new shovels. Both seem to believe each other, and neither does. Their voices fade as they wade deeper, their debate dissolving into the river's endless mutter. While you sift through the gravel, a shadow falls across your shoulder. You look up to see a man with a travel-stained coat and a beard that seems to have collected a week's worth of river mist. His voice carries a soft rasp. "You're working the wrong angle," he says. "The gold gathers where the river hesitates." He kneels beside you, points toward a curve near the bank. There. Water slows just enough to let the heavy pieces drop. His finger traces the line gently, as though drawing a quiet map. You follow his advice, adjusting your position. The next few pans yield nothing, but the rhythm feels more certain, less like guesswork and more like listening. You nod your thanks, but when you glance back at him, he has already moved on, drifting through the cluster of miners like a breeze that refuses to stay in one place. Evening approaches with its usual softness. The light folds around the camp like a settling blanket, and fires begin to burn in the small uneven circles. One fire crackles louder than the rest, drawing a small group of miners who trade stories with cautious enthusiasm. You wander closer, allowing yourself to stand at the outer edge. A dreamer sits at the centre of the group, his hands sweeping wide arcs, as he describes a valley glittering like morning frost. His voice is warm, almost theatrical, shaped by a belief that feels borrowed rather than earned. The men around him listen with half smiles, entertained not by the truth of the tale, but by the way he wants it to be true. You listen too, not because you expect accuracy, but because there is comfort in the performance. It becomes its own kind of warmth, flickering at the edges of the firelight. When the dreamer concludes with a flourish, the men laugh softly, the kind of laughter that reveals nothing but doesn't mock him either. As the crowd disperses, you linger near the flames. Smoke coils upward, slow and deliberate. It curls around your shoulders like a familiar companion, carrying with it the faintest scent of pine resin and scorched wool. You breathe it in, letting the heaviness settle in the space behind your ribs. Later, as you walk back toward your tent, you cross paths with a woman carrying a cracked lantern. Her eyes hold a depth that suggests she has watched more people leave than arrive. She nods to you, and you return the gesture. She doesn't slow, but her voice floats toward you as she passes. "Everyone's just passing through," she says quietly, "even the ones who think they'll stay." The lantern's light wavers on the ground, then disappears behind a row of tents. That night the camp feels different. Not louder or quieter, but fuller. Each person who drifted through the day has left something behind. An idea, a warning, a bit of warmth, a small truth disguised as casual conversation. Their presence softens the edges of your solitude without erasing it. Inside the tent you lie down slowly. The cot creaks its familiar complaint, but you no longer mind. The night air presses gently against the canvas, carrying distant murmurs, laughter, coughing, someone's fragmented story, told to no one in particular. You close your eyes, letting those voices mingle with the river's whisper. They settle around you like campfire smoke, thick, wandering, impossible to hold, yet somehow comforting in their fleeting way. In the drifting of strangers, you begin to understand something quiet and difficult. The search for gold is never only about the earth. It is also about the company you keep and the stories you gather, and the way each passing presence leaves a mark light enough to fade, but heavy enough to remember. The fire dies slowly, as if reluctant to leave you with the dark. A final crackle escapes the wood, a small ember drifts upward, and then the camp sinks into a hush that feels deeper than silence itself. You return to your tent with a heaviness that is not entirely fatigue, more a kind of weight that comes from carrying too many half-formed thoughts through a day that asked far more of you than you expected to give. The canvas walls greet you with their usual sigh, the soft flutter of worn fabric, touched by a wandering breeze. You duck inside, the faint scent of smoke clinging to your clothes, like a memory that refuses to wash away. The cot creaks in its familiar, sympathetic voice as you lower yourself onto it. You lie there, listening to the muffled world moving outside, footsteps fading, someone shifting a crate, a laugh cut short, the river's low murmur threading through everything. You expect sleep to come, but it lingers just out of reach, perched somewhere at the edge of your thoughts. The darkness outside feels oddly alert, as if it has been waiting for you to surrender to it fully. You stare upward, eyes tracing vague shapes in the dim canvas, watching the faint pulse of lantern light from a neighbour's tent ebb and disappear. You turn onto your side, the canvas breathes again, letting in a thin ribbon of wind that runs cool fingers along your arm. It's not unpleasant, just honest. The nights here never pretend to comfort. They arrive as they are, sharp-edged, stretched thin, loaded with the weight of things that refuse to settle during daylight. Voices drift from somewhere deeper in camp. Not loud, just fragments of conversation carried by the wind's uncertain direction. A man humming tunelessly, a cough that sounds like it belongs to an older miner whose lungs have grown accustomed to river mist and ash. The scrape of someone adjusting a tent stake. None of these sounds mean much individually, yet together they create a rhythm you recognize all too well. The subtle orchestra of lives, trying to rest despite having little reason to trust the morning. Your body aches in the familiar places. The wrists you've used to swirl pan after pan, the shoulders that carry tools and consequences, the back that bends toward the river each day, believing, just slightly, never loudly, that something worthwhile may eventually gather in your pan. These aches are more honest than the rare glints of gold. They tell you who you've become with a clarity the days rarely offer. You rub your thumb along the inside of your palm, feeling the small, faint indentation from where the pan's rim rests each time you lift it. A quiet brand carved not by fire, but repetition. Outside, the wind shifts direction. It pulls at the tent in small, tired motions, creating a hush that passes over the camp like a slow exhale. The stars above are hidden tonight behind a layer of cloud that glows faintly with reflected firelight. Even the sky seems reluctant to fully reveal itself. You close your eyes, hoping to drift. For a moment, your mind begins to uncoil, but then a wave of wakefulness rises again, soft but insistent. It presses at the edges of your thoughts, reminding you of conversations half heard, of faces glimpsed over campfires, of stories that stuck to you like ash. The gambler with restless eyes, the preacher whose voice sounded tired even in prayer, the wandering stranger who offered sage tea as though it were a farewell gesture he'd rehearsed many times. Their presence lingers in your thoughts now, filling the space that might otherwise belong to dreams. You picture each of them moving through the camp somewhere tonight, trying to rest under their own roofs of canvas or wood. You imagine the boy upriver, still clumsy with his pan, the woman carrying the cracked lantern, the quiet man who taught you how to read the river's hesitation. They drift through your thoughts, the same way they drift through the camp, soft-footed, leaving traces behind but never settling long enough to be understood fully. The wind brushes the tent again. You roll onto your back. The cot shifts beneath you in a careful sigh. Above, the canvas glows faintly, where a lantern from a distant tent casts a soft, shifting halo. The light wavers as if uncertain, caught in its own sleeplessness. Time stretches in ways you can't quite measure. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like long, drifting thoughts. You've grown accustomed to these sprawling nights, though not entirely comfortable with them. They're made of a quiet that asks questions your waking mind avoids. Questions about how long you can keep working, how much patience the river will demand, how small a fortune you can carry before it feels more burden than blessing. You breathe slowly, trying to coax your mind into softness. Somewhere near the river, a prospector calls out in frustration, his voice swallowed quickly by the wind. Someone else responds with a low curse. Their words fade into murmurs and then into nothing, as though the night is unwilling to carry their sharpness any farther. You pull your blanket higher, burying your hands beneath its rough texture. The fabric smells of earth and campfire, but also of familiarity, a scent that marks the difference between being lost and being temporarily housed by a landscape that doesn't bother to thank you for your presence. As the darkness deepens, the world outside turns into indistinct shapes and muffled sounds. A mule shifts somewhere beyond the tents, snorting softly. Footsteps pass near your tent, slow, heavy, perhaps someone wandering aimlessly to avoid lying awake in their own kind of silence. The footsteps fade, and the wind takes their place. Exhaustion settles beside you like an old companion, not comforting, but known. It doesn't push you towards sleep, it just sits there, waiting for you to acknowledge its presence. You feel the heaviness in your limbs, the dull fog behind your eyes, but the mind refuses to dim itself. Instead, it drifts toward memories, small ones, indistinct at the edges. The feel of sun on your shoulders during better days, the awkward thrill of finding that single gold flake, the laughter that rose unexpectedly at a campfire when someone made a joke too tired to be funny. Moments that don't add up to anything grand but shape the texture of who you're becoming. You shift again, searching for comfort. The cot protests, but holds. The night is long, it always is. Out here, darkness doesn't simply fall, it expands. It fills the empty spaces between thoughts, stretches across hours, with the patience of something ancient. The dark is not frightening, not even unfriendly. It's simply observant, waiting to see which pieces of you will surface when the distractions of work have fallen away. You catch yourself listening for the river's voice. It's softer now, muted by distance and wind, but still present. A low, continuous murmur threading through the night. Its persistence is almost soothing, a reminder that not everything needs to be deciphered to be endured. Your eyes grow heavier, but not enough. Sleep edges toward you, pauses, retreats. You breathe deeper, letting the cold air fill you. Somewhere in that breath, you sense something loosening, not hope exactly, but a small willingness to release the tight grip you've kept on the day. Your thoughts begin to drift in slower patterns. The canvas above you blurs. The sounds of the camp merge into a faint, indistinct hum. You feel the weight of exhaustion settle into your bones, with the calm certainty of someone who knows the night will not offer glory, only surrender. Eventually the world narrows into gentle rhythms. The soft pull of your breath, the faint groan of the cot, the whisper of the wind brushing the canvas walls. Your mind slips towards stillness, not because the dark has coaxed you into rest, but because you no longer have the strength to resist its quiet invitation. The night stretches on, patient as ever, and somewhere within its long, unhurried hours, you finally begin to drift. Morning arrives not with brightness, but with a dull grey that settles itself over the camp like a thin blanket, spread by a distracted hand. You wake to the faint ache behind your eyes and the cold pressed against your knuckles. Your body feels as though the night has pressed some of its weight into you, leaving you heavier than you were when you laid down. You sit slowly, letting the cot complain beneath you, and breathe in the faint scent of smoke lingering from distant fires that never truly go out. Outside, the world moves at a crawl. A pot clinks somewhere. A mule snorts. A man coughs a cough that has nothing new left in it. Everything happens with the same weary pace, a rhythm that asks nothing, promises nothing, and yet insists on being followed. You step into the open air, boots sinking into the thick soil, softened by the night's moisture. The river glimmers faintly under the pale sky, but it makes no real gesture toward inviting you. It simply flows, its own form of survival, steady, endless, indifferent. You rub your hands together, more for the sake of motion than warmth, and begin sorting through the tasks that wait for you in their quiet, uncomplaining way. A shovel with a loosened handle sits propped against your tent. You lower yourself beside it and run your fingers along the worn wood. The crack isn't wide, but it grows a little each day, a reminder of how tools carry the burden of the work long before your body feels it. You take the small length of cord you keep in your pack and begin winding it around the weak spot. The rope bites into the wood with each turn, creating a brace born not from craftsmanship, but necessity. Your fingers work slowly, automatically. Every movement is a quiet admission. Things here don't last unless you help them. The world doesn't swoop in to repair what breaks. It barely notices. You tighten the final knot and test the handle with a gentle shake. It holds, not confidently, but well enough. Out here, well enough is the closest thing to luxury. You move next to the fire pit, scraping away what remains of last night's ashes. The pit is shallow and imperfect, ringed by stones that wobble slightly when touched. You rearrange them anyway, nudging them into something resembling order. The damp wood you gathered yesterday lies stacked nearby. You feel its weight as you lift the smallest piece and strike it against your palm. It's reluctant fuel, the kind that refuses to burn unless coaxed with patience and steady breath. You arrange the sticks carefully, building a loose structure that hopes the flame will find it worthy. When you finally strike the flint, sparks jump like startled insects, scattering before they can settle. You try again and again, until at last a thin flame catches on the fibres. It grows timidly, flickering in uncertain patterns. You watch it with a kind of solemn respect, this frail light you've managed to summon from damp wood and sheer persistence. The fire warms nothing more than your hands, but even that feels like an accomplishment. Survival, you realise, isn't about triumph. It's about these small negotiations made with the world around you, carefully calibrated compromises that allow you to exist in a place that rarely offers warmth without a struggle. While the fire settles, you take out your tin pot and fill it with water from a bucket you left near the door. The water is cold and carries the faint taste of the river, but it's clean enough. You drop a handful of beans into the pot, listening to the gentle plink they make as they fall. The pot hangs crookedly over the flame, suspended from a bent wire hook that has been repaired so many times it feels more patch than metal. The beans soften slowly, reluctantly. Their scent rises in a thin wave, earthy, plain and honest. It's not a meal to celebrate, but it's warm and familiar. As it simmers, you settle onto an overturned crate, letting your body relax in the kind of rest that doesn't ask for sleep, only stillness. You sip the beans straight from the rim, burning your tongue slightly. The heat spreads down your chest, grounding you in a simple, unremarkable gratitude. Around you, the camp begins to take shape in its usual way. A man hammers a board onto a shelter that leans even more than your tent. Someone curses softly as their mule refuses to budge. A woman stirs a pot with a calm that suggests she's done this every day for months. These sounds blend into an odd kind of reassurance. No one here thrives easily, but everyone keeps moving with a muted determination, a shared understanding that work is the only constant in a place that changes too quickly to trust. You wipe your mouth with the back of your sleeve and stand, stretching your shoulders until they loosen with a pop. The tools by your tent wait silently. You reach first for your pan, feeling the cold metal's familiar bite, then the shovel, its reinforced handle smoother now in your grip. You sling both over your shoulder and walk toward the river, your breath visible in short bursts. By the time you reach the bank, several others are already there, each absorbed in their own ritual. You find a spot a little downstream and lower your tools onto the ground. The river's steady rush wraps around you, its voice low and constant. You kneel and dip the pan into the water, watching as gravel and silt swirl into a muddy dance. The weight of the pan feels different today. Not lighter, but more manageable, as though your earlier efforts have strengthened some small tendon in your spirit. The hours pass with the usual slowness, marked only by shifts in the light and the occasional grunt of someone nearby. You find nothing of value today, but the emptiness doesn't sting quite as sharply. Your mind has settled into a quieter place, not hopeful, not defeated, just steady. When the sun climbs to its highest point, you set your tools aside and return to your tent for a brief rest. The beans have cooled, but you eat the last few anyway, grateful for the dull weight they add to your stomach. You take a moment to tighten the ropes on your tent, adjusting the stakes so the wind won't rattle them loose. It's tedious work, but necessary. Everything here needs tending. Your tools, your shelter, your body, your resolve. Later, as the afternoon stretches loosely across the land, you mend a rip in your shirt with uneven stitches. The needle catches in the cloth in stubborn spots, and you mutter under your breath. Though the frustration is mild, the thread is mismatched, scavenged from a neighbour who owed you a favour. The patch isn't pretty, but it holds. Survival rarely cares about elegance. As you finish, a man walks by with a crate balanced on his shoulder. He nods at you. Hard, ja? He asks, motioning toward the shirt. Hard enough, you reply. He shrugs. Everything worth keeping takes a bit of work. You appreciate the simplicity of the sentiment. It fits the place well. Plain, resigned, quietly wise. Evening gathers slowly, its shadows stretching long across the ground. The air cools and the fire pit calls to you again. You build it with more confidence than before, stacking the wood in a way you've learned through trial, error, and stubborn repetition. The flame catches more easily this time. You warm your hands, feeling a small sense of victory settle in your chest. You sit beside the fire, legs stretched, listening to the distant sounds of camp, laughter filtered through exhaustion, a pot clattering against stone, the river's steady hum. Nothing about the night feels triumphant, yet there is a fullness in these moments that surprises you, a quiet dignity in simply enduring. You realize something as the fire crackles beside you. Survival here is not about strength or luck. It's about the small rituals you perform without expecting praise. It's the mending, the boiling, the coaxing of flames from wood that resists burning. It's the acceptance that the world around you doesn't bend to your desires, but allows you, cautiously, to carve out a space within it. You lie down on your cot later with the faint smell of smoke in your hair and the day's residue on your skin. The river whispers outside, steady and indifferent. Your tools rest near the tent flap, ready to be lifted again with the morning. The machinery of survival turns slowly, quietly, without promise. But there is something honest in its gears, something that keeps you moving, even when the world offers little more than another day to endure. By the time the sun drifts into its late morning haze, the camp has grown restless in a way you recognize. An unease wrapped in whispers, a subtle trembling beneath the ordinary grind of the day. You sense it even before you hear the first rumour drifting through the tents, like a stray ember carried by wind. Men lean closer to each other, their voices pitched low, excitement pressed thin beneath caution. You catch fragments, a strike, a pocket, a vein thick as rope, all told in tones that try to sound casual, but fail. The stories bloom quickly, feeding on whatever scraps of hope the morning left behind. One man claims a prospector down the southern ridge pulled up a nugget the size of a walnut. Another insists that a creek 2 valleys over has been tossing gold flakes onto the banks, like the river's having a fit. Someone else says a stranger bought out every shovel in a trading post farther east. Proof, apparently, that he'd discovered something worth keeping quiet about. None of these tales sound entirely believable, but disbelief has little power here. It wilts beneath the slightest heat of imagination. You find yourself listening anyway, if only to understand how people shape hope into something light enough to carry. Near the fire pit, a small group forms around a man whose voice is just loud enough to draw attention. His hair hangs in damp strands across his forehead, and he speaks with the air of someone who has convinced himself first before offering the story to others. I heard they filled 2 pouches before noon, he says, gesturing broadly. 2. Big ones! Had to drag them down the ridge like sacks of potatoes. A few listeners exchange glances, not quite believing, but not wanting to risk the cost of open skepticism. You stand at the fringe of the group, arms folded loosely, listening to the story grow taller with each passing breath. It doesn't take long before the tale shifts. Another man steps forward, claiming he met someone who knew the discoverer personally. Another insists the gold came from a river bend that had been overlooked for months. Another swears he heard the bell of a far-off assay office ringing late into the night, summoning officials to verify the strike. The rumour mutates with remarkable agility, stretching its limbs into shapes that entertain more than inform. You watch the men react, some with wide eyes, some with hollowed ones, some with the hardened expressions of those pretending not to care. But beneath it all is the same soft, familiar ache, the desire to believe in something extravagant enough to eclipse the slow grind of the days. You turn away gently, not wanting to be pulled too deeply into the speculation. As you walk through camp, the stories cling to you like smoke, thin, drifting, persistent. Each new conversation seems to circle the same point. Riches exist, but always elsewhere. Fortune is happening, but always to someone who isn't you. The joke isn't malicious, it's simply part of the landscape here. A kind of communal mythology meant to keep spirits from sinking too heavy into the dirt. At your tent, you sit on your crate and let your hands rest in your lap. The world around you continues its quiet bustle. Pans clattering, ropes tightening, a mule stamping its hoof with weary irritation. These sounds anchor you more firmly than any rumour could. They remind you of the ground beneath your feet, the tools waiting to be lifted, the river's quiet call. You think back to the small flake of gold hidden safely among your things. You turn the memory of it over in your mind like a familiar coin. That little glimpse of possibility felt more honest than the grand stories now rippling through the camp. It was small enough to laugh at, yet real enough to steady you, in a way these rumours never will. Still, the talk continues, echoing through the day. Later, while walking toward the river, you pass two men seated on overturned buckets, their shoulders hunched close. One leans forward, eyes narrowed, voice hushed. He struck it rich, packed his things and left before sunrise, didn't even look back. The other scoffs softly. If he left before sunrise, who told you? The first man hesitates, then shrugs as though the answer is unimportant. His companion chuckles, a dry, humourless sound, and shakes his head. You keep walking. Their laughter follows for a moment before dissolving into the river's steady murmur. At the bank, the water glides past as if carrying the rumours downstream, filtering out their exaggerations until only fragments remain. You kneel in your usual spot, lowering your pan into the current with a practiced calm. Around you, others do the same, though their motions today are a little sharper, a little more hopeful, as though expecting the river to suddenly reveal its generosity. You swirl the pan gently, watching the sand slide away in swirling arcs. There is nothing in the bottom except the same stubborn sediment, the same unremarkable stones. The river continues its indifferent lesson. Rhythm matters, patience matters, dreams rarely do. A prospector near you curses softly under his breath. He tosses his pan aside and stands, rubbing his forehead with a hand streaked in mud. His voice trembles with the frustration of someone who wants desperately to believe the rumours, but feels betrayed by his own experience. I swear, he mutters, every strike happens everywhere, but here. You look up briefly and offer him a faint nod. He returns it with a weary smile before picking up his pan again, the familiar resignation settling back into his shoulders. As the afternoon drifts on, the energy around camp shifts again. The rumours, once bright and animated, begin to sag under their own weight. You watch the stories deflate in real time, details growing inconsistent, witnesses becoming vague, and by evening the tale has been revised so many times that it resembles little more than a well-worn anecdote. And yet the joke never truly dies. It simply reshapes itself. At supper you sit near the fire and listen as a group trades theories with gentle irony. I heard he found a nugget the size of a hen's egg, someone says, laughing into his plate of beans. "Hens must be bigger where he's from," another replies. A few chuckles ripple through the group. They aren't mocking the dream. They're soothing the sting of it. The laughter carries a softness, an acknowledgement that everyone here is balancing on the thin edge between hope and futility. Near the fire, the preacher sits silently, his hands clasped in his lap. When the laughter dies down, he speaks in a low voice. "The richest man I ever knew," he says, "claimed his greatest wealth was knowing how to be content with less than he wanted." No one responds immediately. The fire crackles. The preacher leans back slightly, as if releasing something from his chest. You take a slow sip from your tin cup, letting the warmth settle inside you. The preacher's words settle differently than the rumours. Heavier, steadier, less eager to be believed, but more likely to remain. In their simplicity, they feel truer than any tale of overflowing riches. Later you return to your tent with the faint glow of the fire still dancing in your thoughts. You sit on the edge of your cot, running your thumb along the rough stitching of your blanket. The camp outside hums with small movements, a mule shifting, a pair of men arguing in hushed tones, the river weaving through everything like a second voice. You exhale slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle into your bones. The rumours have passed through you like wind through thin cloth, felt briefly, stirred the surface, then slipped away without leaving real marks. What lingers instead is something quieter, the recognition that hope, when shared, becomes its own kind of currency. You lie back, staring at the faint outline of the tent seams above you. The night carries a coolness that slides along your skin. Your thoughts drift, unhurried. The stories will return tomorrow. New ones, old ones reshaped. Jokes that echo the same longing wrapped in fresh disguises. They will rise and fade with the same predictable rhythm as the river. Riches, it seems, are always happening somewhere else. And yet you stay, not for the promise of gold, but for the strange, tired comfort of believing just enough to keep going one more day. The sky decides without malice and without drama. Some mornings, it gives you a thin, pale day that barely warms your shoulders. Other mornings, it lets loose with a rain that strips the land of patience. You have learned to listen for its small signals, the smell of wet clay before the first drop, the way birds move a fraction earlier than they did yesterday, the angle of light where it falls on the river and tells you whether the day will be lean or generous. When rain comes, it arrives like an accusation. It begins as a whisper on the canvas, then gathers itself into steady punctuation against the tent. You sit beneath the fabric and feel the tiny volleys of sound as if being gently admonished. The mud around camp swells with each passing hour, transforming familiar paths into treacherous mirrors. Boots sink deeper, wagons list and grind to a reluctant halt. Even your tools seem sulky, rope frays faster, canvas sags, and the edge of your shovel grows a little more reluctant to bite the earth. You step out because staying indoors only lets the mind stew on what might have been. The world has a way of becoming too small when you don't leave it. The rain cools your face like a patient hand, and at first it feels like a blessing. Clear air, washed dust, a promise that the river might rinse its secrets loose. But the gift is short-lived. The water fills the gullies and turns your claim into a sloppy kettle. The current running high and angry where it used to meander politely. Stones move, paths shift, and the careful mathematics you had relied on begin to blur. Work becomes a negotiation with inconvenience. You brace yourself against the rain and push forward with the day's tasks, mending a seam with fingers stiff from cold, coaxing a reluctant fire to life beneath wet wood, protecting the small cache of gear you've gathered against the persistent damp. Everything takes twice as long and yields half as much satisfaction. Even small victories. A patched tent that holds through a downpour, a pan that doesn't fill with muck, arrive with the muted pleasure of someone who knows better than to expect fanfare. The men around you adapt in ways that are practical and strangely lyrical. Some wrap themselves in layers, their coats sagging with absorbed water, faces set in quiet stubbornness. Others huddle under makeshift awnings, turning the shelter into a forum where stories are told softly and long. There is a certain solidarity in shared inconvenience. Rain, more than any other trial, seems to flatten the social slope between dreamer and realist. People who once kept their distance come close enough to trade not only advice, but warmth. A heavy storm is an equalizer. The river swells and becomes a different animal, full of new noise and purpose. Rocks that once offered refuge now tumble with renewed insistence. Where you used to find peace in the gentleness of the current, now you find it in its raw power, a reminder that some forces do not negotiate. You stand at the bank and feel the spray on your face, taste the river's wildness on your lips, and understand how small your strategies are in the face of these moods. Then there are the long, relentless stretches of sun. Those days are a different kind of trial. Slow, grinding, and quietly relentless. The earth hardens, cracks running like old scars across the fields. Dust rises in lazy columns that find their way into every seam of clothing and fold of the tent. Water becomes a precious ledger item, parcelled with the kind of thrift that turns small rations into ceremonies. Your skin tightens, your lips split, your tools warm to the touch, as though they too are bearing the strain. You learn the subtle arts of conservation, boiling only what you need, sheltering pans from sun to prevent warping, carrying a small canteen of saved water like a sacred relic. Even laughter thins. The jokes that buoyed wet evenings lose their sheen in relentless heat, becoming smaller and more private. The sun, when it chooses to press its advantage, does not shout. It simply insists until endurance becomes the only meaningful resistance it will accept. The weather teaches a kind of humility that seeps into your posture. You grow careful in the way you arrange your life, tools tended, seams mended, before a storm is even announced, spare cord braided and stowed. Little rituals take on significance. You check the knots on a tent with the solemnity of a person touching an heirloom. You test your shovel's handle as if feeling for the pulse of its future. These small acts are not glamorous. They are the slow, patient maintenance of a life built from the unremarkable. There are days when the sky offers small mercies, cloud cover that cuts the sun's edge, a drizzle that softens dust into a pleasant smell of earth returning to sleep. On such mornings, you move with a cautious optimism, thinking perhaps the day will be generous. The river's surface glints differently. The air sits softer in your lungs. You bask briefly in the relief, knowing the balance between gratitude and caution. In camp, voices sound little more buoyant. A neighbour jokes about a lucky strike that is almost certainly exaggerated, and you laugh because laughter under gentle skies is easier to afford. Weather acts on the camp in social as well as practical ways. Severe storms drive people closer, sharing scarce shelter and food, pressing together in a way that feels almost familial. Heat makes people more solitary, each man tending his own ration and retreating into the scant privacy of a shaded corner. Both extremes sharpen behaviours, generosity in some, frayed tempers in others. You watch these changes as if cataloguing experiments, noting how the same group of people can fold and unfold under the influence of sky and wind. Some men leave when the weather turns particularly cruel. They hitch their wagons, pack their possessions, and take the road again. The camp's population swells and recedes with the seasons. People drift like the weather itself. You do not always understand their choices, and sometimes envy their freedom. Other times you see the way the road chews at them, and you feel grateful for the stubbornness that keeps you here, however inexplicable that stubbornness may be. Occasionally, a storm brings with it a small unexpected boon. A flash flood scours a section of the riverbed and reveals a strip of churned earth with glitter in its folds. Men rush in with the delirious energy of people who believe in miracles simply because they need to. For a brief flurry, the camp sings. Tools raised, laughter rising, pockets suddenly feeling a little fuller. These surges of fortune are never as clean or as complete as the stories make them sound. The gold is often coarse, difficult to separate, and quickly claimed by the first hands to find it. Still, the brief release of communal joy is enormous, like a crack of thunder that cleans the air for a moment. When weather moves back toward its quieter side, whether drying out or clouding over, the camp settles in its own way, changed by what it has endured. Mended tents stand straighter, even if just slightly. A child born of a hard winter grows with a resilience others notice and respect. You notice more too, the way your hands have learned to guess the weather by how the earth smells, the way you check knots without thinking, the ease with which you coax a reluctant flame from soggy wood. At night, after the sky has done what it has decided to do, you sit by the fire and feel the day's weather settle into you like a shawl. The heat or the damp is now internal, woven into muscle and in thought. You listen to the river and the camp and feel the slow rhythm they have imposed. Weather has a blunt and honest pedagogy. There are no hidden lessons, only repeated tests. The world will not soften its edges to teach you gently. It will pressure you, and you will adapt if you can. You pull your blanket closer when the nights are cold, and you allow the thin shirt to dry on your back in the morning sun when it warms. You learn to be meticulous in small things, because weather will exploit your negligence. The endurance you build is quiet. No trumpet announces each successful patch or careful ration. The machinery of survival hums on, and the weather is the crank that keeps it turning. By the end of a season, you feel different, not because you sought change, but because the sky insisted upon it. You're softer in some ways, harder in others. You know the limits of what you can carry, and you have learned that sometimes the best plan is to bend with the wind rather than hold rigid and snap. Outside, the river keeps its slow counsel. You watch its surface reflect the weather's moods. Oil smooth one day, furrowed the next, and you understand with a patient sort of clarity that your life here is not fought in one grand confrontation, but lived in the accumulation of 1,000 small adjustments. You rise ready again for whatever the sky decides tomorrow. The morning arrives with a clarity that makes memory feel both near and strangely distant. You sit on the lip of your tent, the fabric cool beneath your palms, and for a while the work of the day can wait. The river murmurs in the background, steady and uninterested. The camp around you breathes in its habitual way, but your mind drifts elsewhere, pulled by small patient threads that lead back to a life that seems softer around the edges now. Not because it was untouched by trouble, but because its troubles were quieter, easier to name. You remember a door that closed with a particular click, a sound that meant you could leave without worrying the hinges. You remember the simple layout of a room, a table that leaned a little to one side, a shelf with a line of chipped cups, the way light hit the faces of a family at dinner. There was an ordinariness to it, an arrangement of small conveniences that you took for granted until they were gone. That ordinariness taught you how to measure time in ways the road never will, by the boil of a kettle, by the sweep of sunlight on a workbench, by the slow bloom of a garden in summer. Faces come to you in flashes, Someone's laugh at the end of a long day, a child's hand sticky with jam, a neighbour who lent a tool and didn't mention it again. These memories have a domestic weight that feels comforting now, unremarkable, steady, and somehow dignified. They are not grand, they are the kind of small reliabilities you once thought uninteresting and now miss with an intimacy you hadn't expected. You can still recall sounds with an odd precision. The creak of a stair when someone climbed it at night, the low hum of a stove when left to keep warm, the muffled conversation behind a thin wall. Memory doesn't reconstruct the past with photographic fidelity. Instead, it chooses the details that make up a feeling, a patchwork of light and smell and texture that you warm your hands by, like a small campfire when the actual nights grow too long. There is an ache that comes with remembering. It's not a sharp thing. It sits gently behind the eyes, a softened ache that reminds you of what you once had and what you let go for this uncertain pursuit. You think of meals eaten at a table that didn't rattle from each passing wind, of beds that held a comfort not earned by constant vigilance. The simplicity you recall now seems less like deprivation and more like a kind of quiet abundance, enough to anchor you without demanding too much of your attention. You find yourself comparing, gently and without rancour, the rhythms of both lives. Home moved in predictable circles. Work, supper, sleep, repair. Here in the current rhythm of the river and the camp, the circles are wider and often harsher, yet both require their forms of care. At home, you tended people and objects with a tenderness that admitted of repair and forgiveness. Here, you tend to tools and habits with a stubbornness that tolerates only the necessary. Both are forms of survival, different in their grammar, but equal in demand. Sometimes the memories arrive as little embarrassments, petty disagreements remembered now as trivial, requests denied that you would now grant, proud stances that feel oddly immature when revisited. The self you were then appears in flashes that you study with a kind of fond irony. It's comforting to see how much has changed and to acknowledge how some parts of you remain familiar. The same small stubbornness, the same inclination to keep going when it would be easier to stop. You think briefly of writing a letter. You imagine the slow scrape of a pen, the rough fold of paper, the careful sealing of words that might both wound and console. You picture what you would say without inflating or concealing. That you are tired, yes, but not defeated. That small mercies keep you going. That a single flake of gold once felt like a star and still sits beneath your pillow, a private relic. The thought makes you smile in a way that feels almost indulgent. Perhaps you think the act of telling would be as necessary as any tool you carry. The camp offers its small comforts to those who notice them. The neighbour who shares a piece of bread without comment, the woman who fixes a tear in a shirt without expecting anything in return, the man who hums the same thin song as he works. These acts are small odes to the domestic life you remember, gestures that fill in the gaps between hardship and routine. They are not substitutes for what you left behind, but they help you understand that community can be stitched together in many kinds of thread. At times, the memories arrive as instructive examples. You recall how a roof was mended after a storm, how a wound was cleaned and bandaged, how a bad debt was confessed and then quietly handled. Those small practical solutions were lessons in repair and humility. Here, you practice similar lessons with different tools. A seam stitched into canvas, a stubborn shovel handle bound with cord, a conversation with a neighbour that smooths what would otherwise become a small fracture in camp life. You begin to see continuity rather than rupture, the same skills of care applied in new settings. The long look backward has another tendency. It sharpens your sense of value. Where once you prized novelty and possibility, now you measure worth by endurance and reliability. A well-tied knot, a pan that doesn't leak, a neighbour who keeps their promise. These become treasures, the way a coin becomes one after much saving. It's a rearrangement of priorities that feels sensible, and frankly, a bit kinder. At dusk, you find yourself lingering by the river, the water catching the fading light and throwing it back in soft, distracted flashes. You watch the surface with a quiet interest. Memory and river seem to have the same patience. Both move on without demanding that you follow every current. You think of the people who once shared your daily life and how perhaps they watch their own small routines with the same contentment. The thought is neither bitter nor entirely soothing. It's simply another way of acknowledging that lives continue, folded into their own sensible rhythms. Sometimes the past arrives as a temptation to leave. Pack your few things and walk back to that other life. You imagine the ease of it, the shorter road between need and fulfillment, the quiet familiarity of a home apron tied the way it used to be tied. But the pull to stay here is not only about stubbornness or greed, it has its own logic. The small successes that taste like victory because they are hard won, the people whose presence you have come to rely on, the way your hands now know the river's subtle language better than they knew any other. So you stand, shoulders straightening with the small resolve that has kept you moving for weeks now. You lift your pack and feel its familiar weight settle into place. The memory remains like a warm stone in your pocket, useful and comforting, but not something you will set upon and build your camp around again. It is a resource to draw from when the night grows too cold and the dark stretches too long. You walk toward the tents, toward the smell of beans simmering and canvas warmed by late light. The river murmurs as you go, patient as ever, and you imagine your life as a series of small fires, some kindled by the past, some sparked by the present. Each one offers heat enough for the moment, enough to dry damp clothes, warm tired hands, and make the night a little more bearable. When you lie down that evening, the memories do their quiet work. They do not demand that you return, nor do they shame you into greater longing. They sit beside you like an old companion, soft, honest, and faithful. You close your eyes and let the past fold gently into the present, a small private warmth that keeps the cold at bay until sleep takes you. The morning feels different before you even open your eyes. Not colder, not warmer, just quieter in a way that slips under the skin. You sit up slowly, letting the thin light seep through the canvas and spread across the cramped space. Something in that pale glow feels softened, as though the day is arriving with lowered expectations. You step outside, and the air greets you with a stillness that lacks its usual edge. The river is the first thing you look toward, as you always do, but today your gaze meets it without that faint habitual spark of anticipation. It moves as it always has, steady, unhurried, unconcerned with your attention. But the sound that used to reach you like a whispered invitation now feels distant. It flows past your claim as though it has forgotten you ever knelt beside it, cupped water in your hands, or waited for its shifting currents to reveal something buried. Its refusal isn't cruel, it's simply indifferent, like a teacher who has grown tired of repeating the same lesson. You approach the bank anyway, driven more by routine than hope. The earth beneath your boots crumbles in familiar patterns, and the air carries the scent of wet stone and old leaves. You crouch, pan in hand, and dip it into the water. The cold bites your fingertips, but even that familiar sting feels muted. You swirl the gravel gently, watching the sediment drift and settle in all the practiced ways you've learned. But nothing stirs inside you. Not expectation, not frustration, just a kind of quiet observation, the way one watches the wind shift across an open field. The river offers nothing unusual today, just stones, sand, and a clarity that borders on blunt honesty. You sift through them as you always do, Yet each movement feels like a gesture, repeated one too many times. Still functional, still correct, but emptied of its earlier meaning. You pause, letting the pan rest in the water, while your breath fogs faintly in the cool morning air. The river continues on without you, its surface breaking in small ripples that neither invite nor reject. The realization settles slowly. The river isn't calling anymore, and somehow, neither are you. You straighten up, wiping your damp hands on your trousers. A soft ache runs through your back. The accumulation of long days spent bent in service to a promise that rarely held steady. You turn away from the water and let your gaze wander over the camp. It looks much the same. Leaning tents, trails of smoke rising from early fires, figures moving with the slow deliberation of people already tired. But something in the way you see it has shifted. The camp feels less like a place of possibility, more like a place you've simply been standing in for a long time. A few men pass by on their way to the river, exchanging nods that carry the unspoken question of whether today will be their day. You nod back, though the gesture feels borrowed rather than genuine. Your tools rest where you left them earlier, laid out with the same care as always, but even they seem quieter. Objects now instead of extensions of your purpose. You pick up your shovel, testing its weight. It's the same weight it has always been, familiar in your grip, balanced by the cord you wrapped to hold the handle together. But it no longer feels like a companion. It feels like an artifact of a story you're not certain you belong to anymore. Walking through camp, you observe details you usually ignore. The way a man sharpens his pickaxe, with a rhythm that suggests desperation. The hollow sound of boots knocking mud from their soles. The woman stirring a pot outside her tent, her movement sluggish but practiced. You've witnessed these scenes countless times, yet they strike you differently now. Not as shared struggles, but as small, private acts of endurance carried out by people who may no longer believe in the work itself. A breeze passes through, stirring your hair and brushing your cheek with a gentleness you mistake at first for memory. You close your eyes and feel a flicker of something like relief. You've spent so many mornings listening for hints of fortune in the river's shifting currents, waiting for a sign that the dream you followed here had not dissolved entirely. But today, the quiet feels less like an absence and more like an answer. You stop near the fire pit and see the familiar crate where you often sit. You settle onto it now, elbows resting on your knees. The camp's sounds flow around you, a pan striking stone, a voice calling out for help with a stubborn mule, the murmur of early gossip. These sounds used to pull you in, a reminder of the community woven together by necessity and fragile hope. Now they drift past like echoes from a life moving adjacent to yours. Your gaze returns to the river, following its ribbon of movement as it winds through the landscape. You've always felt tethered to it, as if its voice held a promise meant specifically for you. But the tether feels slack now, a cord frayed not by bitterness, but by time. The dream that once pulled at your chest, stubborn, bright, insistent, has softened until it's no more than a faint warmth lingering beneath your ribs. It surprises you how gentle the shift feels. Not a breaking, not a surrender, just a loosening. You rise from the crate and walk toward the tree line, following a narrow path you've never taken fully. The ground is soft with fallen leaves, their scent earthy and nostalgic. At a small rise overlooking the camp, you stop and breathe in the view. The river glints dully under the clouded sky. The tents huddle together like tired animals, seeking shelter in their own company. Smoke curls upward from a dozen small fires, disappearing into the morning air. From here it looks almost peaceful, almost enough. You find yourself remembering the early days, how you arrived with boots too clean and expectations too loud, how every sound the river made seem to speak in riddles meant for you alone. How each prospector's tale fed your hunger for possibility. You recall the small joys, the first flake you found, the warmth of a stranger's tea, the feeling of your hands growing certain with practice, and the sorrows too, the empty pans, the cold nights, the days when even the wind felt indifferent. These memories don't sharpen or sting as much as you expect. They settle around you like fine dust, recognizable but no longer heavy. When you return to camp, the day has grown busier. People move with purpose, driven by need or hope or habit. You watch them for a moment before dipping your head in greeting to a neighbour carrying his pan on one shoulder. "River's high today," he says. You smile faintly. "Seems so." He nods and moves on without suspicion, unaware of the quiet shift that has settled inside you. You kneel beside your tools again, not to work but to gather them. You clean the pan with slow strokes, brushing away dried silt. You fold a worn cloth around the shovel's handle. You place everything into your pack with a kind of ceremony, not a farewell, but an acknowledgement. These tools were faithful to you. They gave you purpose on days when purpose was scarce. The river murmurs behind you, a sound you recognize intimately, but no longer lean toward. You stand and draw in a long, steady breath. The air is cool, honest, unburdened by promise. You don't know yet what leaving will mean, or when the road will feel right beneath your feet, but you sense that the river's silence is not a rejection, it's a permission, a quiet, indifferent blessing that asks nothing from you except the willingness to listen to yourself without the noise of hope crowding your thoughts. You sling the pack over your shoulder and let your posture settle around its weight, lighter now than it has felt in months. You step away from the bank with the calm certainty of someone who has learned to read not just the river's currents, but his own. The water flows on behind you, steady and untethered, and you walk with the unmistakable feeling that something inside you has finally learned how to flow too. When you shoulder your pack, the straps feel more familiar than they did the day you first cinched them over a stranger's hope. This time, there is no clench of denial or sudden flaring of regret, only a plain, steady acceptance that has taken root like a stubborn weed. Your fingers move with the small, practiced economy that months in camp have taught you, folding a blanket, rolling a shirt, tucking the pouch with its single, patient flake into a corner where it won't rattle. The morning air is thin and honest. Mist threads along the river, making the landscape seem softer at the edges, as if the world itself hesitates to commit to anything sharp. You step away from the tent slowly, letting the scene settle behind you. There are faces at the doorways, some surprised, some understanding, some plainly uninterested, each person already wrapped in their own business of staying or leaving. A child waves indiscriminately at the procession of people walking by. You wave back because there is no harm in small courtesy. Your feet find the road with an ease that surprises you. It remembers the weight of your boots. The pack remembers the curve of your shoulders. The river murmurs at your left, steady and unassuming. It does not call, it does not jeer, it simply continues as it always did, carrying its small load of stones and leaves and the faintest glints of sunlight. There is a relief in that indifference, no drama, no final test, only a landscape that keeps on being what it is, regardless of your stubborn little narratives. You walk past places that have folded themselves into the geography of your days. The stump where men used to trade gossip, the lean-to where a woman kept honey in a cracked jar, the rock you once used as a seat when weather taught you patience. Each landmark touches a memory, an odd domestic map of small kindnesses, follies, and the occasional flash of human warmth. You do not mourn them theatrically. Instead, you acknowledge them quietly, like passing acquaintances. Some you will miss in a way that feels like a bruise under the skin. Others will remain curiosities you'll mention in a letter you perhaps will never write. You pass a man arguing gently with his mule, coaxing it along with soft reassurances, as if the animal understands the fragility of daily persistence. They disappear around a bend, dust curling softly in their wake. The sight makes you think of the many little bargains people strike in this life. Trade-offs so ordinary, they become invisible. A pair of boots traded for cord, an extra ration of beans, exchanged for a favour, the sale of a claim for the promise of a lump sum you never see. The economy of survival is not always cruel. Sometimes it is merely pragmatic and small. Your pack is lighter than it would have been had you stayed to accumulate more. Less loot, fewer unnecessary belongings, but the lightness is not exile. It's evidence of the trimming that life here demands. You have learned to value tools over trinkets, warmth over show, steady bread over the dream of a banquet. Those are practical lessons, but they feel like moral refinements too. The discovery that fewer possessions can sometimes mean more clarity. As the path climbs gently away from the river, you look back once, not from obligation, but from a careful desire to carry a clear image forward. The camp is a scatter of tents, smoke rising like the last of an old line of prayers. People move within it, performing their tasks with a quiet ritualism, mending, cooking, bargaining, telling stories that will stretch and fold into whatever future they must serve. You hold that picture for a breath, store it in a pocket of your mind, then turn and continue. The road takes you through landscape that seems changed by the seasons and by the many feet that have tread it. Fields are scarred with shallow trenches where sluice boxes were dragged. Saplings lean where claims were marked. Here and there, the ground holds the ghost of a structure, a foundation, a ring of stones, reminding you of the transience of what people build when they cannot afford permanence. The land is generous in its forgetfulness. It accepts all who pass and lends no judgment to those who leave. A traveller passes you the other way, a bundle slung over his shoulder, his face set in the practical sternness of someone still deciding. He nods, you nod back, you do not exchange tales. The talking people are all spoken for by the river and the camp. Now you travel with thoughts that are mostly private, the weight of small possessions, the odd tenderness toward neighbours you have learned to respect, the faint humour you still find in little misfortunes. There is a softness to your recollections that surprises you, how humour and pity sometimes braid together into something like affection. By mid-afternoon the path widens and the trees thin. Sunlight spills across a stretch of road and warms you like a friendly hand. You stop to rest beneath a lone oak, setting the pack down and loosening the strap that has bruised your shoulder. You take out the pouch as if to measure what you truly carry. The flake of gold sits in your palm, smaller than memory inflates it to, duller than the gleam you first saw at the river. Yet the weight of it is more complicated than mere metal. It is proof and reminder, a talisman of both hope and its limits. You prod the flake with a thumb, considering what it might buy. Food for a week, perhaps a new shirt, maybe a warm meal. At an inn you've heard murmurs about in passing. You could keep it, tuck it away as a stubborn memento of the time you believed. Or you could sell it for something practical, something that turns a small symbol into a small comfort. The choice is not dramatic. It is merely another modest decision in a life that is becoming increasingly defined by them. A child runs by, chasing a stray dog, her laughter bright and immediate. For a moment your hand tightens around the flake, not from greed but from a quiet possessiveness over a memory that still has the power to surprise. You smile without intending to, and then, with deliberate calm, you slide the tiny piece back into its pouch and tuck it into the lining of your pack. It will go with you, not as a promise, but as a small companion. The rest of the walk is unremarkable in the way that's only apparent in hindsight. You pass farms where smoke curls from chimneys, old fences sagged by seasons, a church that leans with the weight of its own congregation. People glance at you, some with curiosity, some with the neutral politeness offered to any traveller. No one asks about your time at the river. No one offers to buy your memories. That silence suits you. You have little appetite for speeches about what you learned or whom you left behind. When you finally reach the edge of a town that sits modestly along a shallow rise, the buildings feel smaller and more certain than the tents ever did. There is a main street, a general store with a bell that rings whenever someone opens its door, and a tavern where men speak with a different kind of assuredness. You stand on the threshold and consider the pouch at your hip and the lighter pack on your back. The innkeeper eyes you with the kind of appraisal people offer when measuring how thoroughly someone has been worn. He asks the usual questions, where you came from, what you did out there, and you answer in the same deliberate way you have learned to use. Not dishonest, just economical. He offers you a room for a night, a sparse place with a mattress that groans more politely than a cot. You hand over the flake to the shopkeep across the street, asking for something simple. Salted meat, a piece of cloth, and a coin or two. The trade is swiftly done, unceremonious, and it feels oddly satisfying. Small mercies are best handled without fanfare. As you settle into a real bed, the mattress making unfamiliar sounds beneath you, you find yourself reflecting, not with bitterness, but with a kind of tender amusement. The years you spent chasing gold have given you something peculiar, an inward economy that measures worth in quiet utilities and sturdy kindnesses. You realise that the richest thing you now carry is not a nugget or a ledger of coins, but a steadier sense of what you can withstand and what you truly need. Sleep comes more easily than it did in the tent. The bed does not complain when you move. The room smells faintly of soap and something baked. You lie still and think of the river one last time, not with longing, but with a respectful acknowledgement of a teacher that taught you more about patience than profit. When morning arrives, you continue your journey with the modest dignity of someone who understands the value of smaller expectations. You keep moving because that is the shape of your life now. Deliberate, pared down, honest. Sometimes you will tell the story, the flake you found, the nights you warmed hands by others' fires, the tiny acts of grace that kept you going. Other times, you will simply listen as people tell their own tales, offering a quiet nod when needed. In time, the memory of the river will soften like an old photograph. Faces from camp will reappear only occasionally in the margin of a thought. The pack on your shoulder will be replaced, mended, reduced, or refilled in different places and under different skies. The gold you chased will remain no more than a small emblem, tucked in a pouch, its meaning changing as you do. Walking away with less than you came does not feel like failure. It feels like a recalibration. The landscape of your life shifts not by grand reversals, but by a series of small, honest adjustments. You have been taught to live on the currency of patience, laughter that carries an ache, food shared without ceremony, and the occasional quiet surprise of a human kindness. You go on step by step with a strange tired clarity that suits you better than the bright certainty you once sought. There is a dignity in slow departure, the kind that accepts what was and what will be without dramatic flair. The road lies ahead, unremarkable and patient, and you find that the ability to keep moving is perhaps the kindest kind of wealth you will ever know. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.